Welcome to the first night of our Cathedral Colloquium for this fall as we think about our cathedral. This evening we're blessed to have Dr. Dennis Castillo with us. He is professor of church history at St. Mary's Seminary and University. He received his PhD in the history of Christianity from the Divinity School of the University of Chicago. Author of 6 books, the most recent being Papal Diplomacy from 1914 to 1989, The 75 Years' War. Currently, he is working on a history of the Catholic Church and cholera in the 19th century. His article on the church in the 1832 cholera epidemic in Baltimore has been accepted for publication in U.S. Catholic Historian. He is also writing on the modern Knights of Malta. He and his wife Kathleen are parents of 3 children and 4 grandchildren and are members of the Cathedral of Mary, our Queen. Dennis, thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you. You hear me? Yeah. Great. Okay, we have a lot of material to cover today, so here's a kind of outline of where we're going to be going. As a historian, if you ask me anything, I usually start 200 or 300 years in the past and run up to it, right? So actually, as part of the colloquium that we're having, I want to be able for us to understand where we are in the 1950s at the time of the building of this cathedral. But before we can do that, we have to, again, take a look at the context, the historical background. So actually, I'd like to begin my time with you tonight by first saying that one of the things I love most about the Catholic Church is how a diverse collection of people, Europeans, Africans, Latin Americans, Asians, are all one community, united by the Eucharist. In fact, when I'm fortunate to travel, I love to go to Mass in different countries. I'm always moved out by how, despite our differences as humans, we're connected as a family spiritually. Now, our Catholic brothers and sisters in other countries live their faith in a variety of situations. My parents were from the island of Malta, which is 120% Catholic. When a new prime minister is sworn in, part of the ceremony is to kiss the crucifix. There are many countries with a strong Catholic identity where Catholicism is part of the national DNA. If you are a member of this culture, then Catholicism is an integral part of it. In other countries, Catholics are a minority. Neither is superior. They're each their own challenges to live the gospel. Today, we're going to be looking at the American Catholic experience from the late to early 20th centuries. Now, this is a unique situation. The United States is a really strange place. We're a predominantly Protestant country, but the largest single church is Roman Catholic. Now, a major part of this struggle, story, is the struggle for Catholics to be accepted as part of the United States. Our situation in the late 19th, early 20th century is similar to other immigrant groups as they struggle for independence, acceptance. The American Catholic dilemma, which is similar to what the Germans experienced, was trying to demonstrate to our Protestant neighbors that a good Catholic can be a good American citizen, while also demonstrating to Rome that a good American can be a good Catholic. And when we look at certain early leaders in the American Catholic community, Archbishop Carroll, Cardinal Gibbons, they really played that very, very well and served the church quite admirably. So the challenge has been to demonstrate that we can be faithful to both creed and constitution. Now, actually, as far as Rome is concerned, for the first few months, we were in pretty good shape after independence. Rome actually was going to play with this whole democracy thing and give it a shot. The 25 priests of the United States were given the right to elect the first bishop, to choose which city the first diocese will be established. But then comes the French Revolution. And after that, Rome is very skittish about republicanism, small r. which is kind of interesting. I mean, today we look at the term Republican, as, a conservative bastion of values, whereas in European history, Republicanism is radical, anti-clerical, and all that. So this becomes very difficult, and it's probably one of the reasons that the United States remains mission territory until the early 20th century. But that's another talk. Tonight we're going to be focusing on the other side, the struggle of Catholics to make a home in the United States. Now, let's see if I can get that. Okay. So first we look at the roots of anti-Catholicism in the United States. So we have a lovely picture of Queen Mary. And the consolation prize that the Stuarts got. So when Rome finally abandoned the Stuart claim to the English throne, they got a nice memorial in St. Peter's. So if you're on your way out to the right, check this out. So the Anglican Reformation is very significant for American Catholicism. The vast majority of American Protestants are of English origin. And so many of the bigotries that are going to be brought to the United States are bigotries that take root in the Anglican Reformation. It's a very long story, of course, but in the Wars of the Roses, you had basically this civil war between two major families, the Yorks and the Lancasters, and they just gutted one another. Now, normally, in those times, if somebody was captured, you treated them well while you negotiated a ransom, but not in the Wars of the Roses. Every time the battle ended, you'd bring the chopping block out because every head you chopped off was one less head a crown could be put on. And so it was very difficult. So when it finally ended, you have Henry Tudor, Henry VII, is King of England. And there's a real concern, a real paranoia that these wars not resume. And so the feeling is if England can go through a few orderly successions with a few strong rulers, this will come to an end. And of course, it's the early 16th, late 15th century, so a strong ruler means a male. And so to make a long story short, Henry VII and his wife do what every good English royal couple do. They produce an heir and a spare. So we have Arthur is going to be the next king of England with his little brother Henry as backup. Arthur marries a Spanish princess, Catherine. He dies at the age of 15. She's a widow. Henry VII is cheap. He's like, now I'm going to have to support this daughter-in-law all these years. So he decides it's cheaper to ask the church to give a dispensation so that Henry can marry his brother's widow. And so we have Henry marry Catherine, but Catherine gives birth to a bouncing baby girl. Henry's not happy with this. To make a long story short, after going through 6 wives, we have 3 surviving children. Edward finally gets the boy. Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. The irony is, of the 3 children of Henry VIII, Edward's the weak one. He's a nice kid, but he's a kind of a weak little boy. He's the prince, by the way, in Twain's Prince and the Pauper. If Henry had only known how strong the daughters were going to be, Bloody Mary and Elizabeth, who stands up to the Spanish Armada, then all of this probably would not have happened, since it was really overriding political concerns that are driving things. Well, he knew what he knew, he did what he did, and so we have Henry VIII takes England out of the Catholic Church. It's a little more complicated than this, but basically it was, he makes himself head of the Church of England, and then it's like, I, Henry, King of England, ask you, Henry, head of Church of England, for divorce. Well, Henry, King of England, you seem like a fine guy. Sure, right? And so now we have the church is taken out of communion with Rome and becomes this very nationalistic thing. And really, nationalism is the only way this is possible. If you had talked to somebody in the Middle Ages about how we should have a Church of England, they'd look at you like you were crazy. Church of England? We're going to have a Church of Trees next? You know, but in the 16th century, with growing nationalism, oh, that makes sense. So that's always a challenge that the church has. Well, as I said, Edward doesn't really last too long. He never reaches the age of majority to rule, and so succession goes to Mary, known in history as Bloody Mary. This is a figure very prominent in anti-Catholic views. She becomes a symbol of Catholic tyranny. So Mary's the the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. She was terribly abused by her father. I mean, to try to pressure Catherine of Aragon to yield to the divorce, he forbid mother and daughter from having any contact with one another. Catherine still held fast. Mary had to endure this. She finally comes to the throne. In 1544, when it looked like Henry wasn't going to have another male heir as backup to Edward, a new succession act was written where Edward would be the next king, followed by Mary and then Elizabeth. Now, Mary tried to restore Catholicism, but the problem with Mary is she was always looking to the past, not to the future. She thought restoring the monasteries was the way to go. And when St. Ignatius of Loyola offered to train young Englishmen as Jesuits, she passed on the offer. So the Bloody Mary title comes from her executing approximately 300 Protestants. This made her very unpopular. Of course, Elizabeth executed over 100 Catholics, but she's not known as Bruising Betty. And then Henry VIII was very ecumenical. He killed both Catholics and Lutherans, but we don't call him Hammering Hank. So there is a kind of selective interpretation here. But she becomes the symbol in the United States of why you can't have a Catholic president. You'll slaughter Protestants in their sleep. You'll have Jesuits be cabinet officials. Money is going to go to Rome. It'll be terrible. Ironically, what Protestants feared would happen under Catholic rule is exactly what happened under Cromwell and the Puritan military dictatorship he established in England and Ireland. The truth is, though, when Catholics were in control, you have freedom, not tyranny. We'll see this when we look at Maryland, when Catholics establish this colony and really have total control. You see toleration, not oppression. So Mary dies. Now, by the way, as far as this Bloody Mary thing goes, Mary had no children, and she knew exactly what was going to happen when she died. The throne would go to her Protestant half-sister, Elizabeth. I think Mary doesn't get the credit for the fact that Elizabeth was safe under Mary. Unlike Mary, Queen of Scots, whom Elizabeth had executed. So Mary dies, the throne comes to Elizabeth. Elizabeth doesn't have children, and then we go to the Stuarts, who rule England, and the last Catholic ruler in England is going to be James II, who is overthrown and replaced by his ungrateful, no-good daughter. So when you have the last Catholic king is driven from England, we see a series of laws passed discriminating against Catholics. And some of these are important for us because we see references to these in the Constitution. So in 1673, the Test Act is passed. In order to hold office in England, you must receive communion according to the rites of the Anglican Church and deny transubstantiation. Now, that last Catholic king, James II, was overthrown after he issued a document to promote religious liberty in England. So that's kind of the irony. It was known as the Declaration of Indulgence, but oh my God, he's going to give freedom to Catholics. He's got to go. Okay, so it was an attempt in power, a Catholic in power, to give freedom, which led to his overthrow. This is the so-called Glorious Revolution. And then in 1689, the year after, we have the English Bill of Rights, which gives Protestants the rights to bear arms, not Catholics. Catholics are going to be discriminated against in England until the Catholic Emancipation Act in 1829. Up until then, they couldn't hold office. And the papacy kind of abandoning the Stuart claim is what opened the door for the Catholic Emancipation Act. Still, though, Catholics are barred from universities till 1871, and Catholics are still barred from the monarchy in England. Moving now to Colonial Catholicism. We have to the left is George Calvert, then his son Cecil, and then the ships that brought our forefathers to Maryland. American Catholic history, particularly in the early part, is really easy. You just got to remember two families, the Calverts and the Carrolls. So George Calvert, the first Lord Baltimore, was baptized Anglican. His parents were Catholic, but under persecution, they converted. And George was raised Anglican, did well, graduated from Oxford, and had a successful career serving the Stuart monarchy. King James I really liked George, and so he granted him a 2,300-acre estate, the Manor of Baltimore in Ireland. In 1624, some theories are that he witnessed abuse of Catholics in Ireland, felt sympathetic to his former co-religionist, and in 1624, he returned to the Catholic faith. Now, upon doing that, he lost all his political offices. Now, the Stuarts were never accused of being too bright, and even though it was unpopular, they didn't care. The king liked George, and so made him a member of his privy council, his private council, which required no public approval. And George dreamed of establishing a refuge for Catholics in the New World. So he received from James I's successor, King Charles I, an enormous proprietary grant, which would become Maryland, named after his wife Henrietta Maria. In the original documentation, there's a hyphen in there, to establish the province of Maryland. This kind of sounds like a Catholic amusement park, you know. Now, this is a proprietary grant. He owns Maryland. He's like a feudal lord. He can do whatever he wants. So here you have a case where the Catholic ownership is in complete control of the territory. Now, one of my future projects is in the Maryland History Museum. When you look at the founding of Maryland, they start with Leonard Calvert, who shows up on the Ark and the Dove. There's nothing about George. There's nothing about how this territory, this colony, was founded for religious liberty. It's just that Leonard shows up and then things got started. So I think that's unfortunate, because really it is one of the things that Maryland could be proud of, that it was founded for a very fine reason. So he's got the grant, But George Calvert dies in 1632 before he can establish the colony. That's why it's the Calvert family that needs to be looked at, not just George or Cecil. So the project gets taken over by his son Cecil, but Cecil is never able to come over here because he has many opponents who aren't happy with the idea of a Catholic colony, and they're trying to undo the grant. So he stays back in England to defend the grant, and so he has to entrust the project to his brother Leonard, who comes over with the colonists on the Ark and the Dove. Now, the majority of the people on the both two boats, are Protestant. There's no discrimination against Protestants to settle in Maryland. In fact, instructions are left by Cecil to Leonard that the Protestants on the boat are to be treated as mildly as possible. They're not to be abused. And kind of as a good model of the future United States, they land. The Protestants go to one end of the beach. The Catholics go to another end of the beach. They both thank God that they made it across in one piece, and then come back together to work together to create a viable colony. So the American Catholic story starts with Maryland, but it's not just Maryland, because William Penn, a Quaker, established Pennsylvania likewise with views of religious toleration. And so pretty much when you look at the approximately 25,000 Catholics in the 13 colonies, it's pretty much Anglo-Catholics in Maryland and German Catholics in Philadelphia. In 1649, Maryland passed the, quote, Act Concerning Religion, the first law guaranteeing religious liberty in the future United States. Again, and this is the, in the Catholic colony, right? It's no Bloody Mary thing going on here. In fact, unfortunately, in American culture, we have the Pilgrims get all this credit for liberty. Yes, they came for religious freedom. But when you look closer, it was religious freedom for themselves. They denied it to everyone else. Quakers were not welcome. Catholics were not welcome. And as we're going to see, one of the unfortunate things that's going to happen when the Irish start coming over, they come to Puritan Boston, which is really the last place they should be going to. So for myself, when I'm looking at the founding fathers of American religious liberty, well, it's the Calverts, it's William Penn, and Roger Williams in Rhode Island. Now, unfortunately, religious liberty for Catholics, ironically, doesn't last in Maryland. In 1689, Puritans took Maryland over, and Catholics were disenfranchised. So now we go from the Calverts to the Carrolls. So Catholics are actually very prominent in the American Revolution. We're less than 1% of the population, but we've got a signer, and we're very active in the independence movement. So again, Catholics in Maryland are disenfranchised, and so for Charles Carroll and his cousin John, they can't go to university in the 13 colonies, and they can't go in England. So Charles Carroll and his cousin John go overseas to Europe. John discerns a vocation and remains to become a Jesuit, and Charles, after receiving multiple law degrees, comes home. And as soon as he comes home, in 1774, he gets embroiled in a big discussion. Back then, the legislature was elected by the people, but the governor was appointed by the crown, and the royal governor wanted to pass a tax to support the established church, the Church of England. Well, the legislature didn't like that, and they voted against it. So the governor waited until the legislature was out of session, and he imposed a fee, saying, well, fee's not a tax. I don't need approval for this. So certain things in Annapolis go back a long way. In the Maryland Gazette, which came out once a month, there's a criticism of this. And so we have this slow-moving debate takes place, where, somebody writes an article, and then a month later there's a response, and it goes back and forth. Well, they're using code names, but everyone knows who are involved in the debate. It's a man, a supporter of the governor named Delaney. That was kind of fascinating when I first moved here, seeing Delaney Valley, and well, they didn't rename that. The guy was a royalist. And the other one is John Carroll. Well, it becomes obvious that Carroll's winning the argument, and Delaney shifts to attacking Carroll on religious grounds. Who is this man that calls himself a citizen, makes his address to the inhabitants of Maryland? Who is he? He has no share in the legislature as a member of any branch. He is incapable of being a member. He is disabled from giving a vote in the choice of representatives by the laws and constitution of the country on the account of his principles. He is not a Protestant. Well, Carroll responds in a phrase that will be echoed by Alfred Smith and John F. Kennedy, saying, quote, "What my speculative notions on religion may be, this is neither the place nor time to declare. My political principles ought only to be questioned on the present occasion." Well, Carroll clearly won the debate. He became a leader of the Patriot Party in Maryland. Ironically, with the First Continental Congress, he couldn't participate as an elected member, but then they changed the laws against Catholics, and he could be there at the second, and he convinced Maryland to vote for independence. Now, the Maryland legislature told its delegation that they could talk about improving things between England and Maryland in the U.S., the 13 colonies, but they were barred from an independence vote. And so Carroll knew he had to be in Maryland, so he left Philadelphia, convinced the legislature to lift the ban, but is not back in time for the vote on July 4th. But he's a signer of the Declaration of Independence. I don't know if this will win you any money on Jeopardy, okay? But all that happened on July 4th is that the motion passed. Should we be independent? Yes, passed. Okay, well, that's not that dramatic, right? It's just some minutes in the congressional record. So they decided that we should have a more formal, glorious kind of statement. And, Thomas Jefferson, of course, writes that. And by the time it's ready to sign, Carroll is back. And so actually it's not signed until August. And the thing about Charles Carroll was he was the one signer with the most to lose. He had an estate valued at 200,000 pounds sterling at that time, which today, according to the National Archives in UK, is worth over $50 million. Had we lost the revolution, that property, all of it, would have been confiscated. He's also significant in blocking an attempt to remove Washington from command of the Continental Army. Catholics make great contributions to independence. Again, these supposedly disloyal people that you can't trust. So the Carroll family, the Brent family, two prominent Maryland families very active in the Revolution. George Meade in Philadelphia fits out privateers to raid British ships. We have foreign Catholics. These people who are going to be so feared later on are very pivotal. France, Spain provide arms and military support. We have the Marquis Lafayette, a couple Poles, Count Pulaski and Tadeusz Kościuszko are very prominent in the American Revolution. Pardon? Okay. Yes, Kościuszko. Yeah, just spell it the way it sounds. And something that really isn't very well known. Now, And when the Treaty of Paris is signed, granting the United States independence, it's not the 13 colonies. It's all the land east of the Mississippi. Why? Well, partly because of a priest, Father Pierre Gibault, the pastor of Illinois and Indiana. So we talk about grouping parishes. Well, you got states. And when there were some raids going on in Western Virginia, and so they fitted out an expedition to head into the area. This was led by George Rogers Clark, the brother of the guy with the Lewis and Clark expedition. And this Father Gibault convinced his congregations to come over to the American side. So when the war is over, we're in possession of towns in Indiana and Illinois, which gives us the ability to claim these areas with the 13 colonies. Now, as far as the Holy See and American Catholicism, well, first off, Catholics in the 13 colonies were under the Vicar Apostolic in London. And once independence is granted, he's like, I don't have to worry about you guys anymore. You're on your own. You're an independent country now. And so what do we do for the Catholics in the 13 colonies? You have Bishop Briand in Quebec, but he just deals with French Catholics. The Vatican, or the Holy See, in 1789, under Pope Pius VI, established the Diocese of Baltimore. And again, as I mentioned, I think it's really critical what the Holy See does in the months before the French Revolution. It shows that they are very willing to work with this experiment in democracy. And as I mentioned, he allowed the 25 priests of the United States to elect the first bishop and to pick where the diocese would be located. The first bishop, John Carroll, was hoping that this could become an American custom, that it will be the tradition of the Catholic Church in the United States to elect its bishop. But after the French Revolution, there was no way that was happening. The United States did maintain consular relations with the Papal States. So we didn't have a full ambassador, but there was a consul from 1797 till 1870, when the Papal States were confiscated. This seemed quite innocent, right? So because one of the things we're going to see is, if you elect a Catholic, then the Pope is going to take control of the United States. So early nativism. Nativism is the view that the United States should be composed only of American-born Protestants. Catholics, non-Anglo-Saxons are a threat to the American Republic. So here we have a couple cartoons. The one on the left, you have the whiskey-drinking Irish and the beer-drinking Germans holding a ballot box. This is what's going to happen to democracy if we let those people in here. And then you've got the Pope in control of the American government. There's Al Smith serving alcohol with these cabinet officials. Now, in the early 1800s, we're starting to see a good deal of anti-Catholic literature come out. Samuel Morse, yes, that's Samuel Morse, and the famous abolitionist Lyman Beecher both wrote books warning their fellow countrymen of the foreign Catholic menace, that is, of a Catholic conspiracy to take control of the U.S. Morse wrote The Foreign Conspiracy Against the Liberties of the U.S. in 1834. On Catholics and religious liberty, he wrote, quote, "It is a beautiful feature in our Constitution that every man is left to worship God according to the dictates of his own conscience. The Catholic is permitted to work in the light of Protestant toleration, to mature his plans and to execute his designs, to extinguish that light and destroy the hands that hold it. On immigration, he wrote, every American should feel his national blood mount at the very thought of foreign interference. Let us be aware lest we admit to dangerous fellowship those who cannot and will not use our hospitality aright. The Catholics will never get democracy. It's a danger to admit them in. They're under control of their priests. In 1835, Lyman Beecher, again, who was a major abolitionist, and by the way, this is one of the reasons why you don't see Catholics actively cooperating with abolitionists. You know, they're seeing these people as being anti-Catholic, so they kind of kept at arm's length. Now, on the threat of Catholic immigrants to American security, Beecher wrote, quote, 3/4 of the foreign immigrants whose accumulating tide is rolling in upon us are, through the medium of their religion and priesthood, as entirely accessible to the control of the kings of Europe as if they were an army of soldiers. Another nation within the nation, the Greek in the midst of Troy. So it's almost like this was a planned conspiracy. We're going to send Catholics into the U.S., and then the kings of Europe were to control them, and they were going to do a takeover. In 1836, escaped nun books were really popular bestsellers in the 19th century. So, you know, nuns who go over the wall and do tell-alls. The most famous came out in 1836, The Awful Disclosures of Maria Monk, which is supposed to be a tell-all of what really goes on in convents. It told stories of tunnels linking rectories and convents and all kinds of sordid, terrible things with children, babies being murdered and such. So this was actually the best-selling book in the United States till Uncle Tom's Cabin. Now, we're lucky that Maria and her handlers had to sue over royalties. And so there's a court record here. And in the course of the court record, we have the testimony of Maria's mother, who's like, my daughter is not a nun. Now, Maria stuck a lead pencil in her ear when she was 10, so she really hasn't been right ever since. Now, all this really intrigued the judge, and he wanted to proceed further, but they dropped the lawsuit and forgot about it. Also, you had this Presbyterian editor of a magazine who did business in Canada. Supposedly the story takes place in Canada. And so he goes up to Montreal. He asks for permission to look at the place where this all supposedly happened. There was a map in the book. And so he writes that, well, whatever facility they're talking about in the book has nothing to do with this place. He, of course, was then accused of being a Jesuit and all that. So, you know, in anti-Catholic literature, Jesuits are always big because of that fourth vow of obedience to the papacy. Not to digress, but this guy in England, an editor, was putting together an encyclopedia of American conspiracy theories. So he's looking for contributors, and I said, oh, I hope you have a Jesuit article being played. Oh, yeah, no, I got that. Well, 2 months later, he contacts me and says, you know, my Jesuit guy backed out. Can you do this? Oh, yeah, sure. You know. And normally I tell my students to avoid the internet, but in this case, it's a gold mine. You know, you find all kinds of crazy stuff out there. Now, in many ways, the experience of American Catholics with all these accusations, all these people, you know, thinking what really goes on in convents and all that kind of thing, was very similar to the early church, where everybody knew that Christians practiced cannibalism, incense, all these kinds of terrible things. So when you're a minority and people have vicious rumors about you, it's very hard to check those. So the United States is a church of immigrants. And so to the left, we see why the Irish came. So that's what the potato blight looks like. Oops. It's telling me I better hurry up. Everyone comes for a different reason. The Irish are coming because of this calamity of the potato blight, where there's mass starvation. Ireland today is still below its pre-famine population. So it's 4 waves. It's the Irish, the Germans, the Italians, and the Poles. The Irish come because of this disaster. The Germans are coming because of religious freedom. In 1870, there's a persecution of Catholics going on in Germany, so that results in many coming. But the Germans at least come with capital. So they don't stay on the East Coast. They keep heading west, do their Wisconsin dairy farms and all that. The Poles, Poland is divided into 3 parts. And depending on what part of Poland you come from, that determines why you came, right? If you're from the German-occupied Poland, you're coming for religious freedom and political freedom. If you're coming from southern Poland, which is run by the Austrians are Catholic, so that's fine, but it's a very poor part of Poland. And Russian Poland, you have religious persecution and cultural persecution trying to impose Russian on the people. The Italians, our Italian-American community is not representative of Italy. They're all from the south. There was no good reason to leave northern Italy, but southern Italy was very poor. Another thing about Italian immigration is that of all the groups, they're the most likely to come, make a living, and then go back home. Right? So you may have left as Nino, that good for nothing, but when you come back, you're Don Antonio. You have a nice villa and all that. So a big debate in the American Catholic Church is assimilation or establishing national churches. The Irish were in favor of assimilation, but the Germans, the Italians, they really believed that it's through the culture that the faith is preserved. And so it was a big battle. The nationalist group ultimately won. So, for example, in 1920 in Baltimore, you have 6 German parishes, 3 Polish parishes, 2 Italian, 2 for African Americans, and then churches for the Czechs and the Lithuanians. But with all this immigration, we have increased nativism. So here, got the Pope trying to rule the country. And then, Christian nationalism is not new. So here we have, the KKK, our heroes, trying to defeat this papal threat. We have a party founded, the American Party, popularly known as the Know Nothing Party, founded in 1854. This is anti-Catholic, it's anti-immigrant. By the mid-1850s, they've won 6 governorships and control the legislatures in 9 states, including Maryland. One of their big plans was to try to increase residency for citizenship from 5 years to 21 years. Well, if an American born in the United States has to wait 21 years to vote, then these people have to wait 21 years. They actually got 22% of the vote in the 1856 presidential election. So now we get to the 20s. So we finally have a Catholic who is able to make a run for the presidency. The 20s were a difficult time for Catholics. We have another outbreak of nativism. There are anti-Catholic covenants written in real estate to try to block Catholics from settling in certain parts of Baltimore. In 1924, the Immigration Act is passed, quote, to maintain the racial preponderance of the basic strain of our people, and thereby to stabilize the ethnic composition of the population. If you didn't know any better, you'd think this came out of Nazi Germany. Catholics were 22% of the population at that time and had been frozen since at 22%. It really discriminated against Eastern Europeans and Southern Europeans. My mother didn't make the quota. We also have the KKK, the second KKK, being reestablished in 1915. There's an attempt to ban parochial schools in Oregon. So this was the Compulsory Education Act of 1922, supported by the KKK. An order of nuns, the Society of Sisters of the Holy Name of Jesus and Mary, challenged this. And so in 1925, the court ruled 9-0 in favor of the sisters in Pierce versus Society of Sisters. Unfortunately, the nuns felt too insecure to argue on religious liberty grounds, so they shifted it to parental choice. And that was the court's decision, that, quote, the child is not the mere creature of the state. Parents have the ultimate right to decide where their kids go to school. In 1924, Alfred Smith, who was a four-term governor of New York, tried to get the nomination for the presidency. He was blocked in 24, was nominated in 1928 by the Democrats to be the first Catholic presidential candidate. Religion was a major issue in this election. Even though he was a Democrat, he would face opposition from Dixiecrats in the South who opposed him as a Catholic. Religion made a big impact on the voter turnout. In 24, the voter turnout was 48%. In 28, it was 57%. In 28, 6 states that normally voted Democrat voted Republican, though being Catholic gained him Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Now, the conventional wisdom is that Kennedy was elected in 1960 because he addressed the religion issue. Smith did it. In fact, Smith did a better job than Kennedy did. It's a very passionate speech. Unfortunately, I don't think I have time to read it, but it didn't work. Now, to be honest, there are reasons other than bigotry to vote against Smith in 28. Smith was a wet candidate, meaning he opposed prohibition. And the one thing that liberal and conservative Protestants agreed on was prohibition. So in 60, that's not an issue, so that's going to help. Actually, to be honest, the Catholic Church was lucky in 28. Had Smith won, he would have been president at the time of the Great Depression. And boy, we would never have lived that one down. Well, we elect a Catholic president, and he sent all his money over to Rome. So now we get to acceptance. At the time the Cathedral of Mary Our Queen is constructed, there are many changes taking place affecting the Catholic community in the 40s and 50s. In World War II, 30% of those in the armed forces were Catholic, despite Catholics being 22% of the population. One consequence is the connections that take place. The Methodist kid from Iowa is sharing a foxhole with the Italian-American kid, Catholic kid from the Bronx. Also, we have the GI Bill. Because Catholics are serving to a greater degree, they benefit to a greater degree. So now we have Catholics who are going to law school, going to engineering school. And a tremendous change takes place where we go from being a community of have-nots to haves. So you take all the New Deal legislation, pro-labor and such, and then the GI Bill. And the Catholic community in the 50s is far more affluent than the one in the 30s. With this new affluence and the baby boom, we're moving out into the suburbs. Well, what about those national churches that we were nagging the bishops to build? We don't need those anymore. Now we want to assimilate. And so this is one of our problems, that the church built these churches for those communities in the late 19th century, and in the late 20th century, we had to close them. And it's very difficult. Finally, one of the best things that happened for the American Catholic Church was the Cold War. A terrible thing, but because of the Cold War, Catholics are no longer the greatest threat to American way of life. The communists are. And our anti-communist credentials are impeccable. Cardinal Manzeni in Hungary, many other bishops behind the Iron Curtain are imprisoned and suffering. Catholics are regarded as the most reliable group in the United States against communism by the FBI. Also, American Catholics are hyper-patriotic. You know, it's interesting if you compare cultures. In revolutionary France, it caused a big ruckus when they wanted to display the flag of the French Republic in churches, where in the United States we go out of our way to put the American flag, you know, in the sanctuary, because again, we want to demonstrate our Americanness. Finally, in the area of church changes, as we all know, a great deal did happen and change Catholic faith with Vatican II. But what's really not appreciated is that there are reform movements underway in the 20s, the 30s, the 50s, which really all get woven together at Vatican II. We have the liturgical movement in the 20s trying to encourage greater lay participation. You have Pius XI and the Catholic Action Movement, encouraging greater Catholic involvement in the world as the church in the world. The Pius XII issues encyclicals on the laity, that the laity should regard themselves as the church. We're seeing changes in some liturgical reforms. The fast time reduced from 12 hours to 3, or from midnight to 3, and a variety of other things. And then finally, the 1943 encyclical on the scriptures to try to help bring Catholic biblical scholarship up to date. So just to conclude that by the 50s, we still have problems, but you've got Fulton Sheen on TV, and that's a big hit. You know, so it's again showing greater acceptance. Okay, thank you. Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I was in Malta with the Sixth Fleet in the 66.
Oh, good. I hope you had a good time.
I'd love to go back. It's a beautiful, beautiful island. My first question is, can you connect, I'm a graduate under the Jesuit education, can you connect Jamestown and St. Mary's with the state of Maryland as far as the Catholic first site of Catholicism here?
Well, it would be St. Mary's. I mean, yeah. It's kind of funny. Jamestown is the first colony founded in the United States. I mean, if we're excluding St. Augustine, founded 1565. But at Thanksgiving, we don't celebrate the Jamestown story, the first story. They came for economic purposes to plant and export tobacco. So maybe we should celebrate that, because it's about coming here and making a buck. I sometimes think what that would be like. Every year, the family would gather around a tobacco leaf, and the youngest would light up a cigarette and tell the story. But we don't. We do Plymouth instead. We do the Pilgrims. We've decided that we feel that is more complementary to the American story to look at that one. But then again, there's a dark side of the Pilgrims. I mean, they had this covenantal theology that only members of the community could have political rights. So it's going to be kind of ironic at independence, before the First Amendment, is passed. You could be a Catholic and be president of the United States, but you couldn't be governor of Massachusetts because they still had an established church. Massachusetts had an established church till 1833. So, yeah.
I grew up in the 40s and 50s, and during that era, when you went to church, the pews were just packed with people.
Yep.
And I would have such a distinct memory that churches were so filled that people were standing in the aisles, all up and down the aisles.
Yeah.
Was there a particular religious fervor in that era that brought this about?
Well, one of the things that kind of worked good for us, the historian John Tracy Ellis used the term Catholic ghetto. And so because of our being excluded or discriminated against, we kind of developed our own institutions, right? You don't join the Masons, you join the Knights of Columbus. Okay, there's the Catholic Order of Foresters instead of the Boy Scouts, the Catholic Daughters of Isabella, for the girls. And everything was just a community. I mean, the church and the community were identical. And so it really reinforced everything. And so, yeah, I mean, how do you recreate that? I mean, that Catholic, we have to be creative to discern what values there were and how do we recreate them. Like in Catholic healthcare, with nuns running everything, even the people emptying the waste pails were fully formed spiritual individuals. You can't recreate that. So how do we try to do that? But yeah, so with that strong community, I mean, you go to some of these inner city churches from the old days, massive churches, and the church, including the school, it's the whole city block. It's really, really quite impressive. Yeah.
Thank you for the context leading up to the years when the cathedral was built. Do you have any comment about why this cathedral ended up looking the way it does?
Oh, I don't know anything about the architecture. As I was telling Father, I kind of feel like I'm entering into the Lord of the Rings with the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. But again, it's quite stunning. But yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the art. Well, what is it? It's some kind of Art Deco Gothic. I think I saw it. I'm like, oh wow, that's kind of cool. So,
It's a good question for tomorrow.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
My second question was back to the history. What do you see as the common thread that people are afraid of Catholics historically coming forward? Why do they not want the Catholics involved?
Yeah. Well, we're big. We have this foreign, as they're looking at this foreign, ruler. The papacy would love to have a tenth of the power everyone thought that they had. If the Pope told all Catholics to jump in the lake, they would, that kind of thing. But it's strange, it's different, right? Just like Muslims coming into the U.S., right? And honestly, stick my neck out. I mean, in many ways, Muslims are feeling exactly the same thing that Catholics did. These people don't get American culture. How can we be admitting these people? They just don't get it, right? Well, that's exactly what was, said about us, as well. One of the things, though, I have to say I'm proud of as an American is that Kennedy got elected before Vatican II. So it's still the Church of the Latin Mass. It still looks really weird to non-Catholics, but enough Americans, including the graveyard vote in Cook County, was able to, elect Kennedy despite those reservations. Yeah, but yeah, it's a difficult thing, I think.
Afraid the Pope will be president.
My father, I think it delayed his becoming a citizen a good 20 years. So he's an immigrant. He's working in the factories, and there are people asking him, "Is it true that if Kennedy's elected, that we'll have to eat fish on Friday?" He's like, "What?" But yeah, there's a lot of these fears. So, but yeah, once we get that election, we're past that, everything's okay. However, I think we have to be careful. Kennedy was elected before Roe versus Wade, and the abortion issue complicates things. Also, politically, the Catholic community and the Democrats were very tight. That's largely because the Republican Party is a combination of different pieces. So it's the old Whigs and the Free Soilers, the anti-slavery folks, but also parts of the old American Party, the Know Nothing Party. And so, Catholics stuck queer. Not that they were treated that much better by the Democrats, but still that was part of it. But now things have really, broken up. And so as we vote, really no one party fits Catholic social teaching, completely. So it's always a difficult thing to do.
Seems like we're too liberal. We're too conservative. There's a whole liberal trend taking place. And people don't want our conservative approach to morals and ethics.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful.
And it goes back to Henry and prior to Henry.
Yeah. That's true.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Doctor. We appreciate your time and your insights and taking us through many centuries, rather, in good order.
Sleigh ride through the centuries.
Yeah, amen. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.